Hello and welcome to the latest instalment of Law & Order, the video series where I look at and unpack stories from games. In this one, we'll be looking at the story from Capcom's new title and potential new franchise, Pragmata. Now, I wasn't initially going to cover this game, but after reading some reviews praising the game and seeing some gameplay, I decided to buy it. The game had a fairly long development cycle, and it was first shown back in 2020, also known as the Year of Doom, and was even delayed indefinitely in 2023, but things started to gather pace around this title last year, in 2025. I needed to play something fresh with unique gameplay, and Pragmata delivered that. He plays a human called Hugh, and he gets accompanied on a lunar space station by an android who has the appearance of a young girl whom he names Diana. She uses her ability to hack machines, opening them up to damage, whilst Hugh destroys them with weapons. Now, this game isn't really heavy on the story, as it's more about the gameplay, but it still holds a fairly interesting narrative that I thought would be good to make into a video. As I do with this type of video, I'll first explain the plot, as if you were playing through the game, a simplified version of the plot, and we'll dive into certain areas of the lore afterwards. Finally, the video will contain spoilers for Pragmata, and if you're enjoying the video at any point, please hit the like button as it helps this video's performance. But let's get into it. Sometime in the near future, the Delphi Corporation had developed a revolutionary method of manufacturing, which uses a substance discovered on the moon called Lunum, and once converted into another substance, it facilitates 3D printing on a large scale using a machine called a limb replicator. Given the unique properties of what is called Lunafilament, Delphi constructed a lunar mining facility called the Cradle, built so they could get a good and consistent supply of Lunafilament. The facility has an artificial intelligence known as EDIS, which stands for the Intelligent Direction Unification System, which itself oversees a huge number of robotic workers. A few humans are also stationed at the facility too, and they would send regular updates back to Earth. However, communications had stopped at one point, so Delphi send a team up to the Cradle to investigate. One of these is our protagonist, Hugh Williams. On approach, the crew still cannot reach EDIS, and disembarking their shuttle, they're surprised to see that there's no welcome party as the place is completely deserted. Stepping into an area, admiring the view, they can see the limb replicator, essentially the Delphi Corporation's massive 3D printer, constructing a large tower. Moving on, Hugh is able to get to grips with the suit's functions, and further forward, signs of a struggle are here, with debris blocking a doorway. What on earth happened here? They use a replicator to quickly construct a robot, and they ask it to clear a path and to take them to the data center. It clears the path for them and leads them forward, but the crew can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. Things then start to shake, and an automated voice warns the crew of seismic activity. It's what is called a moonquake, a sudden release of energy. A window shatters and two of the crew get sucked out of it, with Hugh and his colleague being saved by way of an emergency shutter. Hugh is then saved by his captain, who is crushed by a falling pipe. Hugh then falls down into the depths of the facility. He comes to a bit later, having been saved by what appears to be a young girl, who repaired the integrity of his damaged exosuit. Slightly confused as to why a young girl is here on the Cradle, EDIS appears and introduces itself, calling Hugh an unregistered guest, and EDIS instructs the robot that they built earlier and that fell down with Hugh to remove him from the premises. Dodging the robot, Hugh fires on it, but it doesn't do much damage as it's armoured. The girl tries to help and is eventually able to. She's able to hack it, revealing weak points by opening up its armour, and Hugh targets the weak points, shooting the thing and destroying it. Hugh realises that the girl is an android, and he hears from his captain who tries to tell him to contact Earth, and he screams out in pain. Spotting a shuttle, Hugh and the girl are able to fight their way to safety. On the way to the place called the shelter, it appears that something happened around the tall structure they were all looking at earlier, as something seems to have erupted from the lunar surface. Hugh and the girl talk, and she reveals she is designated as DI-0336-7, but Hugh gives her an easier to remember name, Diana. She calls herself a state-of-the-art Pragmata, created there at the Cradle. They eventually arrive at the shelter, and after a quick nifty hack by Diana, Hugh finds out the relay channels are locked down, as is the comms tower, but the solar power plant is not. Hugh says that if they can restore power, they can get to the comms tower. Going to the power plant, it's entered emergency mode thanks to the moonquake, so after starting up the backup generators, Hugh learns they need to go up to the top floor of the facility to restart the main power. He and Diana must fight their way through many bots, with them eventually making it up to the top floor. They manage to lift the lockdown and they reboot the main power system, but EDIS interrupts, severing the primary connection and sending a massive robot to stop them. Using Diana's ability to hack into the robot security system, like with other robots, this opens up its armour and Hugh deals damage to it. After a long fight dodging missiles made from the Lunafilament, they're able to bring the bot down. The energy levels then get restored, with Hugh teaching Diana the concept of a high five. On returning to the shelter, they meet Minnie Cabin, who was sent there, as upon defeating the big bot just now, Hugh received a shelter license key. This upgrades the shelter and allows more space, and upgrades for Hugh's weaponry and Diana's hacking abilities. But onwards they must go. They head to what's called the MPA, or the Mass Production Array. Whilst there, they spot a hologram of a cat running round, and Diana runs after it, almost falling down into the depths before she is saved by Hugh. So this place seems like it was printing big things, such as ships and airliners. And they see a taxi being printed too, and this printing stopped when the moonquake hit. Making their way through a long tunnel, they emerge out into something unbelievable. The Delphi Corporation had used Lunafilament in order to construct cityscapes. The comms tower sits in the middle of it, a large building. Walking up to the comms tower, they find themselves once again halted, this time by way of a large security gate which requires 6 locks to be deactivated. They are then chased off of the main street by a very creepy looking robot. Hugh and Diana move through the streets and up across the rooftops, battling more robots, and they reset the 6 access beacons. Resuming their stroll towards the tower, nothing is ever that easy as another huge robot stands before them, sent by Edis, this one even bigger than the last. Regardless of its size and ferocity, Hugh and Diana must put it down if they are to proceed. So they fight it, avoiding its many attacks, managing to finally destroy it. Afterwards, having entered the comms tower, Hugh is disappointed not to see any people there, and he finds access to the communications network is being denied by Edis. He identifies another place he could contact Earth from, and that is the Terradome, which has a few cargo transporters that were set to head to Earth. The cat from before shows up, and quite bizarrely it talks to Hugh and Diana. The voice identifies itself as someone called 8, who is using the cat's hologram as a method of contacting someone. 8 says she was caught in the moonquake. She's trapped in the Terradome and cannot move, asking for help and that she must get to Earth. The connection then drops and the cat runs off. Hugh mentions that it seems like 8 knows Diana, but she cannot recall ever meeting or knowing 8. Hugh is reluctant to mount a rescue at first, but admits he's eager to find out what's going on. So they leave for the Terradome. Arriving, they're both blown away by it. They do end up encountering a few new robot workers here, all of them hostile of course. Stepping inside the main lift area, they see that there has been abnormal plant growth, and is blocking the central lift up to 8. Doing a manual reboot of the limb regulators fails thanks to more nonsense from Edis, and talking with 8 again, Hugh and Diana learn that they have to reboot 2 limb regulators, and that should get rid of the tree blocking the lift. Finding the first, and then the second, they now need to go and rescue 8. Now being able to ride the lift up, they approach her. She looks just like Diana. She's pinned in place by a tree, and says that while she was preparing to depart for Earth, the moonquake struck and Edis was damaged, and as a result it went rogue. The robots, the trees, and most other things on the Cradle went out of control. She says that if they can access the mainframe, they can force Edis to go offline with a stop code. As Pragmatas, both her and Diana are equipped to be able to overwrite a system's programming, but Diana can't recall her having that ability within her own memory. Hugh tries to remove the tree holding 8 in place, but he's unsuccessful as another regulator needs to be reset. He says they can shut Edis down and then head to Earth. Hugh does question why 8 wants to go to Earth, but nonetheless they head underground in order to try and help her out. On the way, Hugh and Diana come across a replica of a beach, and Diana says that she wants to see the real ocean on Earth. Hugh tells her that he'll take her back to Earth with him. They move through the soil testing area and fight off many more robots, including another massive one, another guardian sent by Edis. Once again, Hugh and Diana use their combined abilities to bring this beast of a bot down. A tough task completed, they approach the console and free 8. Returning to her, she's pretty weak, but she's happy she can finally move. She says that she needs to stop Edis, and speaking of the devil, Edis pipes in and talks about biomaterial and having to seal the sector. The door begins to close and Hugh and Diana are in danger of being trapped. 8 transfers data to Diana, and it finishes just in time for them to slide under the door, leaving 8 behind. Going back to the shelter, a new area, the Lunam mines, has been opened up, and Hugh and Diana get ready to head out. Arriving at the mines, they are now out in the open, so Hugh's movements are a little bit more slow. They get eyes on the Nexus Tower, the tower that houses Edis. They also encounter another massive robot. It's a tunneler, and like everything else here, it's gone rogue. Avoiding it for now since its armor is impenetrable, Hugh and Diana work their way through the various mining areas. On the way, they find emails between staff members, and they seem to suggest that someone is controlling Edis, but they don't know who. They also find an email mentioning a Dr. Higgins, and Diana mentions that the name rings a bell, as it was in the data that 8 transferred over to her, and they realise that he's the one who created Pragmata. Anyway, Hugh and Diana end up having to avoid the large lunar digger bot inside its tunnels, and this eventually leads to a showdown against the thing. Having learned from a previous note they'd read, they need to somehow get to the machine's rear sensor inside the mouth. So damaging it enough, they get access to the mouth, and after a few more attempts, they're able to defeat the lunar digger. With the Nexus tower within reach, they ascend it in order to confront Edis. The bodies of staff members lie in front of the mainframe room, dead, killed by Lunafilament. No doubt they'd attempted to try and shut Edis down after the robot started attacking. Approaching Edis, the AI activates what is called anti-personnel measures, and Hugh collapses in agony. Diana then takes over and uses the stop code 8 gave her to shut Edis down. Edis then reboots with a surprise in store.
Initiating command code E9900. Administrative privileges to 8 restored. Resuming transfer of dead filament to the central port. Thank you for your cooperation.
What is all this?
But I thought we stopped it, right?
Transfer of dead filaments to the central port. Thank you for your cooperation. Transferring dead filaments.
What are you doing here?
Non-essential contact with the payload is prohibited.
What is all that?
Hugh Williams, you've completely ruined her.
You tricked us?
Hardly. I truly needed your assistance. But I must complete my objective. To spread dead filament across the Earth. No. Why? I thought you'd understand. What a waste.
Transferring dead filaments to the central port.
So with them having been played, Hugh infected, and Diana severely damaged, they need to get back to the shelter. Getting there, Cabin tells them to take a tram to a secret area, Experimental Pragmatics. Arriving in this top secret area, Hugh places Diana onto a machine, and it reprints lost limbs, but there's an issue, as it can't finish decontaminating her. It needs a reactor, so off they both go to find one. Diana is operating at a limited capacity, considering she has malfunctions due to the dead filament corrupting her. Now, given this is the workplace of the aforementioned Dr. Higgins, they find out a little bit more information about him and his work. As mentioned earlier, he's the director of Pragmata, and this is the program that produced Diana and 8. He was surprised to see Diana there with Dr. Higgins, which is strange as she had no memory of him. But things are slowly starting to come back to her now that she's processed the memory data that she got from 8, and she remembers that she was produced in Dr. Higgins' attempts to try and save his sick and dying daughter, Daisy, but that she was a failure. The laboratory and its surrounding areas are covered with the same black substance found by the mainframe room. Remnants of dead filament. Managing to get to a reactor, they grab it, and after Diana collapses, Hugh carries her and runs back to the machine. Placing Diana into it, all of the memories she's gained during her time with Hugh pop up on the screen, but she's sad from what she learned. Sad that she's useless because she wasn't able to help Dr. Higgins' daughter. Hugh tells Diana to think about what she wants, and she thinks of the ocean that she wants to see on Earth. With her being fixed in the machine, Hugh waits, but an unwanted guest shows up. He has to defend her from another guardian of sorts called the Sentinel. It's a fierce opponent made all the harder to fight considering he was on his own. But thankfully Diana is all better after a minute or so and she springs back into action, stopping the Sentinel. They go to move out, but Hugh is struggling now. He's infected with the dead filament that 8 attacked him with, and it's spreading, but he chooses to hide this from Diana. Nonetheless, they move out and head back to the shelter. They now need to head out to the central port. Diana has reservations as she's a Pragmata like 8, and doesn't want to hurt her, but she wants her stopped. Arriving at the central port, which is the location of the transport that 8 wants to use to get to Earth, like other areas in the Cradle, they have to move through the different areas, cleansing the dead filament, and they see that the filament is starting to corrupt the robots. They see a hologram recording of 8, in which she mentions that under the right conditions, the dead filament will coact with its subject. Overlooking containers full of it, she says that she will need more of it for whatever she's planning, something she calls a global chain reaction. Moving further into the central port, they see that the black substance is everywhere and it's spreading, coming from all over the Cradle. They correctly surmise that if this much of the stuff reaches Earth, then it's game over. It's becoming clearer that this is what 8's plan is. In order to get to the orbital elevator in the distance, they need to navigate hazards, fight robots under the control of Edis, which is under the control of 8, and cleanse filament. They see something disturbing, especially so for Hugh, and it is 2 staff members that were infected by the dead filament, and who suffered a horrible, painful death, evaporating into what is a black dust on the ground. Diana tells him that she can't cleanse infected humans, but Hugh is still keeping his infection a secret from her. Eventually, Hugh and Diana must resume their fight with the Sentinel, who has dropped in for an arse-kicking. After obliging and defeating this weapon, they also find the Lunafilament labs and learn about the fate of Dr. Higgins. In a recording of a conversation with 8, he's dying as a result of dead filament infection. He tells 8 that he's sorry, and in his delusion, since his mental acuity is deteriorating, he thinks 8 is his daughter Daisy. He died of a cardiac arrest. Hugh realizes the clock is ticking for him too, so they need to get a move on. After a while, they finally approach the orbital elevator, and they confront 8. She tells them the shipment for Earth is almost ready, and that she's nearly fulfilled her purpose that she says was a purpose that she and Diana were meant to share. She once again attempts to send shards of dead filament towards Hugh, but he's wise to it this time, and so is Diana, who tells 8 that she decides her own purpose, and that she's going to Earth with Hugh. 8 then merges the dead filament into a singular entity with her at the centre of it as she plans to visit Earth, aiming to deliver the message Dr. Higgins wished to spread about the dangers of Lunafilament. The corruption in her by way of the dead filament makes for a difficult task, but they're able to defeat 8. After the entity she created crumbles away, 8 asks Diana to tell Earth about the pain and suffering of Dr. Higgins. Whilst 8 fades away, Hugh tells Diana their transport is at the top of the tower, and they leave for it. On the way, Diana is sad about 8, and Hugh is in agony from his infection. Unfortunately, the cargo platform they're on violently shakes, therefore indicating that something isn't right. The dead filament is mounting an attack, and it's out of control. Realizing that it could follow them to Earth, Hugh sees a cannon there and says they need to destroy it. Using the cannon, they ascend the orbital elevator, trying to avoid the dead filament. With Diana hacking and charging up the cannon, Hugh fires it a couple of times, and this destroys the very angry substance. It destroyed the source, but unfortunately the shuttle they wanted to use to escape the Cradle has been destroyed by the damage just now. This fight took a lot out of Diana, and she's in danger of floating off into space, but Hugh grabs her. Having reached the top of the tower now, they get to the cargo transport. It's not suitable for humans, but considering Hugh's infection and impending death, he never intended to leave. For him, the aim was to get Diana to safety and to Earth, just like she wanted. Placing her on board and shutting the door to the shuttle, he reveals his infection to her. Hugh says his goodbyes, and a distraught Diana is then sent to Earth as the battery on Hugh's suit begins to fade, since he used his to power the shuttle. He floats off towards the destroyed Cradle. Sometime later, Diana's shuttle made it to Earth and she landed on a beach. She looks up at the moon thinking of Hugh and saying that she's ready, and the game then ends. Alright, so there's a lot to unpack here. Let's start by discussing the discovery and application of the so-called miracle material, Lunafilament. Right, so let's go back to its discovery. When the moon was being explored, an ore by the name of Lunam was discovered, completely by accident. It was refined through nanomachines, and out of it came Lunafilament, which is a material that was capable of replicating data, both of a structural and functional quality. Delphi decided to establish the Cradle on the moon, and they explored the applications for it to be used, mining it. This discovery would elevate Delphi's growth. The possibilities were almost endless. They could, as we saw earlier, create cityscapes using new material, with the staff members excited that Lunafilament had the potential to recreate people's memories. The New York that we saw was just Delphi's urban recreation project, creating cityscapes around the world, but this test showed that rapid urban development was now possible, and the plan was to try this out back on Earth. People would use the limb replicator to craft things that reminded them of home, things from back on Earth. Hugh and Diana can find the blueprints around the Cradle. These are called REMs, Read Earth Memories, and people would buy these chips to replicate items. Taking them back to the shelter, he was able to create things that Diana has never seen before, such as skateboards, slides, and swings. Limb, however, is fragile and breaks easily, but Delphi combine it with other materials to make it more resilient. But they also think it's just cheaper to rebuild something using the replicator than improving its quality. There would be some issues with it, such as printer errors resulting in Lunafilament growths. The Delphi Corporation itself is one of the biggest and most respected companies in the tech industry, according to Hugh. They've got a great public image, and Hugh says they pay well. The Delphi Corporation's plan was to send all human staff back to Earth eventually, and for it to be completely run by the AI. But that all changed when the Delphi Corporation entered into a strategic partnership with the world's leading expert in nanotechnology, Dr. Neil Higgins. But more on his particular story arc shortly. As explained, the Cradle itself was set up to mine Lunam, where it of course would be converted into the Lunafilament. The station itself consisted of the power plant, which was the beating heart of the Cradle, the mass production array, which produced large items such as jumbo airliners, ships, and some smaller items like cars. There was also the Terradome, which brought complex environments of Earth to life through the gift that was Lunafilament output tech, and what they printed for the Terradome contained certain algorithms that simulated real-life plant growth, adapting to their environment. They had a plant factory in the Terradome using saplings, and careful cultivation was observed by the researchers. The overall goal was to develop trees that could expand their structure just like trees on Earth, with water and sunlight, but that goal was way into the future. For now, Delphi would have the trees managed by an AI in an eco-modelling lab and generative chips. Of course, the Delphi plan was to replace the human researchers with the robot workforce, so they could carry on cultivation operations on their own. They also put lasers in place as a defense against pests. They also considered how artificial lightning, created by fabricating lightning generators from the Lunafilament, could play a part in creating habitable conditions in the soil in dead zones, which are oxygen-depleted areas. They had plans to build and started construction of a second Terradome to further support their research, but this was put on hold in order to carry out emergency work on the Nexus Tower and Delphi's AI-managed sectors. But what did the staff on the Cradle think? Thankfully, all interactions are recorded by Delphi Corporation as holograms. It states in one email by a staff member called Jacob, which was flagged by Delphi, that staff had agreed upon them joining the Cradle to 24-hour surveillance. Thanks to this, we can see remnants of conversations between staff members. People were fascinated at just how much the walkers, the standard robots, were capable of, and they even imagined they could be used as childcare. But some workers would argue that they weren't capable of human tasks, such as innovation. One Delphi staff member in particular was very innovative, a staff member named Sharon. She was a gifted child once, who had previously written a thesis at age 15, and this caught the eye of Delphi, and she was then brought on board with what they were doing on the moon. She worked in the terraforming development department. It's probably in large part thanks to the work of Sharon that Delphi were able to develop the tech to be able to build the limb replicator in the first place. She then invented what she called a hollow wall. She had combined holographic projection with Lunafilament, and she actually had to do this off her own back, as her request to produce them didn't go through given the huge amounts of energy it took to create these hollow walls. Sharon would use the hollow wall to escape bothersome colleagues too. At some point, Sharon was granted level 5 access privileges, and she saw the data for the Read Earth memories. She found that the REMs didn't mimic material, but they were perfect imitations that one couldn't really tell apart from the real thing. But Sharon did start to question where Delphi were getting this information or data from in order to replicate these things. More and more of Sharon's hidey holes would pop up at different areas around the Cradle. One of them contained a book collection belonging to another staff member, and she started to see why people collected physical media. She stated that she hates an AI being nosy and giving her recommendations on what she should read next. Sharon had also got a hold of the source code for the plants being grown in the Terradome, and played a trick on the woman who created the source for the plants, Rachel, by tweaking the code, allowing for unchecked plant growth. She said that she left Rachel a note, but it's pretty clear that she didn't see it or readjust it, as lots of areas in the Terradome ended up being overrun by overgrown plants. But all was not fun and excitement on the Cradle. Some staff simply didn't enjoy being up there and they missed home. Some tried to fail a weekly fitness test so they could get sent home, as the conditions there were so unbearable. This failed anyway, since an AI was put in charge of said test, and it saw through the attempt to fake poor performance. Since so many jobs had been given to the robot workforce, there were also some staff there on the Cradle that were bored out of their minds, and one employee, Kevin, wrote to another in an email in which he stated that an emptiness was gnawing at him. He wondered if the robots had been created not to serve them, but to take away any sense of purpose that they had. Workers would receive some comfort, creature comforts, but this was a lottery, with one lucky winner being able to replicate a pet from back home. Finally, in terms of Sharon, she'd got a notice granting her level 6 clearance, and this granted her access to experimental pragmatics. She was basically told to stop making her hollow walls, as the new AI, Edis, would know, due to every staff member now having to have a bio-link. She wondered if Edis was watching her. She decided to turn down the invitation to work in experimental pragmatics, instead choosing to leave the company altogether. She'd had a dig around into Edis and found that staff were expected to share their health biodata with Delphi, and she said this would allow for rapid integration with business systems and coordinating team assets. But she saw it for what it was: thought control. Forced to follow the company rules, and as someone who liked to play outside of those rules and regulations set up by Delphi, Sharon wanted out. Right along with all that, there was also a freelance reporter by the name of Daniel Galliano, who had infiltrated the Delphi Corporation. He was after a massive scoop. Unfortunately, his live feed was cut off by the AI security system. You can guess which system that was. Recording what he could with a handheld camera, he describes what Delphi had discovered as a personal piggy bank, and he reveals in his logs that he's there to get dirt on someone. Digging around for information, Daniel finds out some of the staff care about the Cradle's image, others just see it as a passion project of a tech giant. The next day, Daniel wrote about how he expected more staff to be working in the Terradome. He'd learned the staff there had been reassigned in order to test out a new management AI, and this was Delphi's work towards the Cradle being fully automated. Daniel noticed another tram line on the map that was unmarked and wondered where it led. He found that special clearance was required in order to ride that particular line. Daniel thought that it was reserved for the Delphi big shots, but he made it his mission to get access to whatever was being hidden down there. He tried many avenues in order to find out more. Searching staff quarters by forging a biometric lock, Daniel read an unsent email on a worker's tablet, and it mentioned the words experimental pragmatics access. He put 2 and 2 together and figured this was what the hidden line leads to. Daniel writes about the new management AI they were testing, Edis. Daniel heard from a staff member that Edis is spying on people. Every conversation, hence the holograms of previous interactions between staff, all recorded by Edis. The following day, Daniel had noticed that the worker that wrote the email mentioning experimental pragmatics access hadn't been seen anywhere, but staff were putting it down to reassignment to another area. He later found an email mentioning someone called Employee F had been opposed to the rollout of Edis. Daniel suspected Employee F was part of experimental pragmatics, and then Daniel started to get worried as his press pass got cut short and he scheduled for a hasty departure in 3 days, and he suspected that Edis knew what he was up to. So the next day, with a new resolve as time was short, Daniel got a stroke of luck. Employee F had emailed him, as the email came from Experimental Pragmatics. Employee F heard about Daniel being a reporter and wants to go back to Earth, as he doesn't want to have to work with an AI. It turns out that technicians working in pragmatics aren't able to just leave. Daniel made a deal with Employee F to tell him everything he knows, and Daniel writes that the man he's looking for is none other than Dr. Neil Higgins. The following day, Employee F sent Daniel to go and find a toolbox that he'd hidden. Daniel finds the box and finds a data drive inside it, and it reveals that the Delphi Corporation are in breach of a number of violations of the Lunar Accord. Lunafilament is being turned into weaponry. Excavation of the moon also poses an environmental risk, but Delphi want that sweet bread. Any concerns raised were suppressed. Also there on the drive were pieces of evidence supporting these claims. This is all juicy stuff, but Daniel needs more. He needs information on how to tie all of this to Dr. Higgins. On the day Daniel is due to fly home, he met Employee F. Daniel handed him a press pass along with an ID tag telling him that he's after Dr. Higgins. Employee F tells him that Higgins isn't a bad person, and he was just looking out for his family. Daniel asks Employee F to give him his pass so he can confront Dr. Higgins, to which Employee F expresses his surprise that Daniel doesn't plan to take the shuttle back to Earth with him. Then, Employee F boarded the shuttle, returning to Earth. Daniel writes that he wants to know why Higgins abandoned his family when both his wife and his daughter were sick, and reveals that Higgins' wife was Daniel's sister. Daniel is Dr. Higgins' brother-in-law. He makes it to experimental pragmatics, but there's not one person there. He stumbles across a machine, the Sentinel, immediately realizing that these are just some of the things that Delphi want to weaponize and sell. Realizing he needs Dr. Higgins' biometric data to get into the lab, he finds a medical device, the one Hugh used to fix Diana, and the monitor mentions that, as we already know, Higgins had been infected by dead filament. Daniel poked around a bit and found a video message Higgins had recorded for Daisy. It mentioned Pragmata. He then spotted Diana in the corner, charging, eyes closed. Daniel calls what Higgins had been working on, the realization of lunafilament research and treatment, replacing diseased body tissue with lunafilament, even brain tissue. Daniel's goal was clear: to gather as much data as possible on the dangers of lunafilament so he can warn the public about it. Daniel surmised that he may be able to send the data back to Earth on a cargo shuttle. All of a sudden, though, Daniel started to feel very cold. He was woken up to the sound of gunfire. Finding a backup EVA suit, Daniel finds that Edis has now taken over, the trams are down, and bots are being ordered to initiate the removal protocol. Thinking that he can only get transport via the orbital elevator, Daniel is desperate to get this story out of there and onto Earth, so he makes his way across the tracks. He's not heard from again. But we now need to go into more detail about the Pragmatas and Higgins' research. So Dr. Neil Higgins spent years researching rare diseases, but what did the Delphi staff members think of Dr. Higgins? Well, one employee, while she was happy to be transferred to the Limb Lab, shared her concern about working with Dr. Higgins, given his genius and the pace at which he worked, often being able to come up with things on the fly. He was also a notoriously difficult man to pin down, and had limited availability for consultation, as seen through his schedule. Rumours were swirling around the Cradle about human-like androids being developed within the Cradle itself, with people catching glimpses of both Diana and 8. This led to quite a few conversations about the ethics behind what Delphi were doing, and why androids were being made in the image of children since they're meant to be guinea pigs. Some dismissed others' concerns, saying that bans on life like androids only applied on Earth and not on the Moon. As long as it didn't affect them, they didn't really care. Emails were being sent amongst colleagues that directly stated what Higgins was doing, and that he'd brought Daisy's biometric data to the Cradle. Now, as mentioned in the previous chapter, Higgins had a wife who was sick, and his daughter Daisy was sick too. Higgins' wife died and Daisy was scheduled to go through clinical trials. At some point, also mentioned earlier on, Higgins entered into a partnership with Delphi, and he moved to the Cradle to carry out research, but the collaboration was pushed by Delphi more than anyone else. His goal was to create artificial bodies for Daisy to test and research for the clinical trials. These prototype bodies were named Pragmata. Pragmata are autonomous prosthetic bodies that have a simulated organic structure. At the time the game takes place, they were still considered a prototype, and they weren't compatible with the work bots on the Cradle due to differences in design. How this would work is that Lunafilament printed artificial organs we placed inside a host, a synthetic one, that was controlled by an AI since transplantation into human subjects wasn't suitable. This AI would be fine-tuned to a patient's physiological and psychological profile, and therefore it would produce the biological conditions needed for that organ, or at least that was Higgins' theory. Higgins hoped that these mock trials would provide the level of accuracy they'd get if they were to do human trials. When DI-0336-7, Diana, was created, Dr. Higgins would inform her of what her purpose was, and that was to give them clear, actionable data to cure Daisy. Problem is, Diana wasn't good enough in order to save Daisy, as the Pragmata failed to adapt to the mutations of the Lunafilament. It was noted that this could have been because the Pragmata was a younger model than the target patient, Daisy. Apparently, she had the ability to remove degraded filament. Therefore, as the human body cannot eliminate degraded Lunafilament, accurate test data could not be obtained, just like every previous prototype. So another prototype had to be used, and this prototype was 8. Diana would be kept though. Instead of being disposed of, she was to be shut down and placed into storage, as Higgins considered the data they had been able to collect would come in handy. An interesting observation made by Higgins was that the two prototypes would call each other 7 and 8, and it reminded him of Daisy when she was younger, always giving names to things. He considered that this was an imprinting of Daisy's personality onto them. He had to stop himself from developing an emotional attachment to them, as he needed to see them as just test subjects. Before she was placed into storage, Diana's memory was wiped. Higgins identified the malfunction seen in Diana, removed it in 8, and he added a new feature in which she was able to concentrate degraded or dead Lunafilament. They'd found that they needed a way to extract or expel the filament. Eventually he'd gotten what he wished for, a positive result, the potential key to saving Daisy, all thanks to 8. Higgins now had no further need for 7, Diana, since he'd now achieved what he needed. After many missed Christmases, birthdays, and other important events, Dr. Higgins vowed to go home and stay home. No more research. But then, Daisy died. Then the truth came out. She didn't die from her illness. So when Higgins had sent the data on his findings to Delphi HQ back on Earth, one of the Delphi higher-ups wanted to claim credit for this incredible breakthrough and pushed into human testing when it wasn't ready. Their test subject was a child, same age as Daisy, but of course, the human trial failed. Only the child they had used was Daisy herself, but all the witnesses were silenced by Delphi in order to bury the truth. The person who wrote about this cover-up in an email considers this to perhaps be Delphi's karma. Obviously distraught by the news of Daisy's death and angry at Delphi for what they did to her, he locked himself in his lab. One employee email states that he locked himself in there for at least 10 days. He wrote a note to Daisy telling her he was sorry that he couldn't save her, that he had been a fool, saying that he should have chosen to spend his time with her instead. As mentioned earlier and as seen in the game, his infection from dead filament set in, and his mental acuity deteriorated with him thinking 8 was Daisy. He told her that he was so close, but that Earth and Delphi took her from him. Higgins then died of a cardiac arrest. At this point, Diana was in sleep mode until the moonquake that shook the Cradle, and then, as we know, she helped Hugh, leading to the events of the game. But let's unpack the disaster in a bit more detail, the point where everything kicked off. So with the Delphi Corporation's installation and rollout of Edus, things were getting a little bit twitchy on the Cradle. Sharon notes here that she was passing through one of the areas in the Cradle, and one of the sector guard robots pointed a gun at her. She'd managed to hide behind one of her hollow walls, but she mentioned Delphi's bot division had been ramping up their munitions testing, with demand being high. These things were being produced for military applications, contrary to Delphi's good image that we mentioned earlier on. One staff member writes about a routine check report, and mentions that Edus had received an unrecognized admin level update, leaving the staff confused as to why this was done and who had authorized it. It was 8. According to emails between staff members, the AI security teams were going through, checking everyone's devices and their access logs. Strange things started to happen. A staff member, Noah Parker, was admitted to the medical lab with strange growths on his right forearm, and it was growing as well. As we know, this was an infection resulting from exposure to dead filament, further suggesting that the dead filament, or probably the lunum itself, is not a material, but a living organism. The panic filtered all the way up to the Delphi higher-ups, with them becoming worried about this black substance. They discovered a bit more later on that it dissolves organic matter, and they were incredibly worried about its potential impact on Earth. As we know, the black substance was the dead filament. Noah Parker eventually became completely unresponsive and showed no reaction to external stimuli, and not only that, but Parker's originally infected arm, parts of his chest and lower jaw had now lost their original form. Staff were considering him deceased. When Hugh and Diana were in the central port, they found another of 8's holograms, and she was asking Edus to calculate the risks of something. Edus responded and told her there was an 87% probability of Cradle personnel intervening, and it's revealed that 8 was the one who ordered Edus to kill everyone. Why? Well, it all goes back to what Dr. Higgins had told her, that Earth and Delphi were the ones responsible for taking Daisy from him, so she planned revenge on his behalf. She wrote after Higgins had died that after reconstructing some of his fragmented memories, she was able to learn of his desperation to tell people about the dangers of dead filament. Her plan was to transform it into a memory medium and send it to Earth as a singular being, and that everyone it touches would understand his wish. Staff started to panic, seeing large bots attacking humans, their colleagues. They wondered why Edus wasn't doing anything to help, but of course it was under the control of 8. Attacks then continued all over the base, with mining equipment also going rogue and attacking the human workers, despite Delphi's R&D teams putting biometric ID systems in place in order to ensure that this wouldn't happen. In one pretty chilling message written by a staff member in the Terradome, he tried to send out an email with the words "help me," but it was flagged and quarantined for inappropriate content by Edus. The message itself stated that bots were going haywire and were killing people on the orders of Edus, and the sender of the email was begging for help to be sent. As we saw, people basically dissolved into a black dust after being infected by the dead filament, which is why there was no sign of any life when Hugh and his fellow crew members arrived on the Cradle. As for why 8 had been pinned in place by a tree by Edus isn't really known, at least I couldn't find anything concrete, but it's possible Edus regained control at some point, could have been via Delphi HQ on Earth, and tried to stop her, until Hugh and Diana turned up and gave her back control. Okay, so to finish, there's a secret ending to this game. You have to complete the game, and then a new mode appears on the main menu, titled Unknown Signal. In it, Hugh has to go through a bunch of training sims inside a hidden chamber. Hugh will then receive a special mod called the Black Box mod, and after fully completing every area to 100% and defeating 8 again, the game's credits roll, the screen fades to black, and the player hears Cabin asking Hugh if he's travelling alone today, indicating that Hugh was able to survive the dead filament infection by way of the Black Box mod, which states that it suppresses the spread of dead filament in organic life. This may be setting up a sequel, but we'll have to wait to find that out. But that's it for this video on the story of Pragmata. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like and subscribe if you aren't already. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, but for now, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.